I'm so glad you're all here. This is like the best venue in the entire universe. I can't get over how exciting it is. So the first thing I always ask everybody is, how many of you have seen me in person before? Oh my God, that's fantastic. I'm not going to repeat myself unless I actually repeat myself. I'll try not to do that. So the first thing I always warn you all is that because I used to lecture to some very disinterested university students, I know. I have this habit of pacing because I developed it because you could see people's heads moving, and then you knew if they were awake or not. I'd be like, you, wake up, or get out. Anyway, so I'm sorry about the pacing thing. It's all old habits die hard. Yes, so I've been here in DC for a little while because I've been at the World Fantasy Convention, which is going on right across the way. The aforementioned alcohol and bar consumption, as it were. We in sci-fi and fantasy call it the bar con because pretty much everybody just spends the whole time at the bar getting caught up. It's like returning to summer camp with alcohol. I apologize, but you know it's in your future if you're going to be a writer. So you just. I'm not telling you to prepare now, but and there definitely are those who don't drink in the bar, but we all lose our voices because we're all yelling in the bar. Although this time around, there's a whole biker contingent that's in the bar with us. And their flag, you know, they've got their patches on and everything, and they're a little. But like it's charming. The sci-fi fantasy author geekdom is totally mingling with all of the bikers. It's really like they're the sweetest guys. It's really quite fabulous. But I tried to take a photograph of the mingling. Right? This is all the authors in the like obligatory corduroy patched coats and all the bikers in their leather vests. And I was like, I gotta get this. Such a good stylized optical vision. Anyway, so I don't read out of my books because, in case you hadn't noticed already, I don't have an English accent. And so I feel like I can't really... I can think in an English accent, but I'm a horrible mimic. I can't talk in an English accent. So I'm not going to read to you guys today. Besides, and this will come as like a great shock to you all, but you can read it yourself. And I'm sure I sound way smarter in your heads than I actually do standing up here. So, yeah, so I'm not going to read, but I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. My policy is that you guys have made the like fantastic and extraordinary effort to come and see me, which is great. Thank you so much. And thank you guys at the Spy Museum for hosting me. It's awesome. But as sort of an I owe you one thing, I'll pretty much answer anything you want to know. Occasionally, I might ask that you maybe not put it on the internet. And if you do, I'll deny it categorically. And occasionally, if it's like a major spoiler, I'll ask if you could maybe just ask me in private later so that it doesn't spoil it for everybody. But yeah, start contemplating those questions. I'm trying to proactively field some questions I might have, but yes, I'm going on next door. But I'm really out of it, and I don't remember any questions that people usually ask me. So does anybody want to start us off? You're brave. Yeah.
Has anybody asked you to go back to teaching a different subject? Teaching how to write a novel or something like that?
I have. I've done some writers' conferences and things like that. So we get things. Writers' conferences are sometimes they're put on by writers' groups, and sometimes they're put on by universities, and they'll bring in an author to kind of guest lecture for a weekend. And I did one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with an actual literary department at a university, which is crazy because usually they don't want anything to do with books that actually sell and people read them. It's going too far. But no, they were awesome. They were really great. They had me in, and I think I met the only like 8 Democrat voters in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But it and they took me, they took me to their one food truck, of which they are very proud. It was kimchi fries, and it was quite tasty. And then there's a Pikes Peak Writers Conference, which is a way bigger deal. It's like, 300 or 400 people, and I pretty much just do. I think I have 3 lectures essentially that I do that I'm happy to trot out for them. I have little handouts and basically tiny syllabi because I'm all prepared because I used to teach. But apart from that, no, I've never been back to my old universities or anything like that. I mean, I suspect they're faintly embarrassed about me. Other questions? We have one over here, yeah.
Well, on that note, where did the Armenian harem come from that you used to use?
The harem of Armenian lovers. So everything I put in my bio is absolutely true. So you'll notice that the harem of Armenian lovers is no more, and that's because I no longer have my harem. I misplaced them. I now have a Catholic schoolboy. I like to say I traded up, but yeah. So they're just gone now, sadly. Actually, I have a very funny story about that. My editor of the adult series came out for my book launch way back in the Bay, back in 2009, and one of my friends, who actually is Armenian, was was tending the bar and my editor, who's very excitable, and also looks like she's 12 years old, went up to get a drink, and he carded her. And she came running over to me later, and she was like, "I just got carded by an Armenian lover." And I was like, "All right, that makes you happy." Other questions? Yeah.
Did you get all the names?
Names for my characters? All right, so she wanted to know, if you'd like, for the recording, I can just repeat the questions. Would that help?
That works.
So she wanted to know where I get the names for my characters. I'm one of those authors who I never struggle with naming characters. I was just talking about when a very dear author friend of mine is a woman named Myrrh Lafferty, and her daughter's name is Fiona, which I think is a fantastic name. But she cannot name her character. She really struggles with it. And I was like, well, maybe you just used up all your naming juju on your daughter. Don't have any left. Yeah, I mean, I've always read a lot of comedy authors like P.G. Wodehouse, and like Lemony Snicket, and I like words and names that have a really good mouth feel. Like Bumbersnoot is really fun to say. It's the way it makes your mouth move. And I guess I don't know. I don't. It's really hard to. Sometimes I'll like Sophronia, for example. I looked up a lot of old-fashioned Victorian names, and I really wanted a name for her. I wanted an S name, and I really wanted a name that felt old-fashioned when you read it. So it wasn't something that was in common use, but it also didn't feel too dissimilar. Like it's almost Sophia. So when I hit on that name, I was like, that's the name. And then with other characters like Soap, for example, I didn't have a choice. Like, it's almost like being schizophrenic. Like sometimes the characters will just come to the back of your head and be like, this is me, and this is my name, and you don't have a choice. And so Soap was like that. So I was like, this is my name, I'm this character. And then other characters I'll fool around with. So Bumbersnoot comes from a bumbershoot, which is an old-fashioned British term for an umbrella. And I just sort of squirreled it around a little bit. So yeah, that's the names. I know. And the other thing is, because I really like to make people laugh and I want to make people, enjoy reading and have a good time while they're reading, a really silly name is basically an easy way to get that into a sentence. And there are certainly some names that anytime it's going to be dropped into a paragraph, even if I'm talking about something serious in that paragraph, the very act of seeing that name on the page cheers up the whole page. So I do use names for that as well. I'll pretty much do anything for a laugh. I'll sacrifice plot, everything, just to make people happier. So that's part of it also. Other questions? Yeah.
Have you ever done theater, like improv or actual theater?
I've been terribly embarrassed to confess this, because I hung out with all the theater geeks. Of course, I hung out with all the theater geeks, obviously. But I was a dancer, At my school, like there was a strict division, and the dancers were like dated the jocks, and the theater geeks were like the cool people who read science fiction and fantasy, and read. But I was a dancer. I don't know if it's still like that, or if it was just my school, but I totally was a dancer who fraternized with the theater geeks. I actually, believe it or not, got terrible stage fright. I still do. If I have to go up on a stage and speak someone else's words, I can't. Like, my memory is awful. I can't memorize lines. I did some plays before I realized that I just sucked at it. So, yeah. I discovered this great thing when I was teaching and when I used to docent tour at museums, which is if you're an expert in it, no one can catch you out on it. So being here and being Gail and talking about my books is like awesome. I don't have any stage fright whatsoever because anything you ask me, I can probably answer. I also discovered that if you just get comfortable with saying, I don't know, or if you're a teacher, I don't know, why don't you go look that up? And then the other thing I discovered is if I make a fool of myself and then I just point it out immediately, then I kind of have control over the embarrassment. You may notice that I do that in my books. So authors call this lamplighting, and it's when you make a big mess up in a book, and then you make it, and then you bring it back around in the next book or later, because it went to press and you couldn't stop the mistake. So you just make it a big deal in the next book, or you just highlight it yourself and say, "Ha, look at that! My character made a big mess up. Woohoo! I'm in on the joke with all of you guys." So that's called lamplighting. I do that a lot too. Again, I get to get away with it because I write comedy. How do we get onto lamplighting from acting? But yeah, there it is. Other questions? Yeah.
Since we are in the spy museum, what about the spy sort of lifestyle influenced your writing in creating the finishing school?
All about that, yeah. So I think a lot of people have a fascination with spies. But for me, a lot of it was tied to specifically writing a young adult series. So I remember, maybe I'm a freak, but I mean, first of all, I had a really good time in high school. And second of all, I remember it really, really clearly. I remember what it was like to be that age really clearly, at least I think I do. And one of the things I remember loving, and possibly because I was a reader and kind of an introverted kid, but I remember loving, just like I was a tree climber too, I would climb up trees and just observe people. And it was just fascinating to me how people would interact, and my friends and kids my own age, but also like adults, and how are they, and not being seen, and observing the wild creature in its native environment. And so for me, there's something about being that age that is almost spy-like, because you're in sort of the traditional sense of like an infiltrator spy, and obviously that's the aspect of spies that very much interests me the most. Where part of being, 14 years old is figuring out society and where you are and what your role might be and what you want to do with yourself. And part of that is this sort of observation, manipulation thing. And I just kind of took my characters and pushed that a little bit further. And I'm always into like human interactions and human relationships and the psychology of things. So obviously that's also part of it. But it just seemed a really natural thing to do, to incorporate this particular age of a protagonist with espionage. Just seems natural. And also for me, it was combined with the very idea of finishing school. So I read a lot of girls' boarding school fiction, like Little Princess and things like when I was young. And so I've always been fascinated with all girls boarding schools as an end result of that, and finishing schools in particular. And I remember watching the BBC's adaptation of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. And there's a line in it where Mr. Bell says in a very facetious manner to a young woman, he says, Miss Latimer is back from Switzerland and she's very much finished. And that line really stuck in my head. Now he's he's a facetious character, and he's making a commentary on her and her sort of uselessness in society, that she's been sent away and come back, and like all she's really good for is going to be married. But the line and that idea of being finished really struck with me, and I thought, you know, how fabulous would it be if you could send girls away ostensibly to be finished, but they're actually being trained in this whole other arena. And that's where the whole kind of idea comes from, because it would be so powerful. As women, especially in this time period, have so little agency, that the idea that you could take them and give them so much power and so much agency and an education where they would learn to read, because a lot of girls in the Victorian era didn't even know how to read, and then send them back into society ostensibly as one mold, but really with all these other underpinnings underneath. Underpinnings. How Victorian. Other questions? Yeah.
Was there a particular reason you settled on the late and then mid-19th century rather than the early 19th century or 18th?
Okay, so was there a particular reason that I chose these exact dates in Victorian history? Yes. So I chose the dates for, well, so I chose Alexia's books, 1870s, because the fashions are so insane, but also because I wanted to get comedy out of the clothing, but also because during that particular time in history, Queen Victoria was engaging in what's referred to as the Little Wars. So there were a lot of small actions going on around the empire, but there was no major war. So we hadn't yet gone into the Crimean or anything like that. And I didn't want there to be a major war going on that I'd have to address in the text. So I really wanted to, so that was one of the reasons. And then the other books' time periods have kind of been chosen because I wanted a certain characters reappearing and that kind of thing. And so I had certain windows of time that would work for the other series, but also because the 1850s is just such a ridiculous fashion time, like these incredibly huge skirts. I mean, it just gets worse, frankly, in the 60s, but these huge skirts and then the 1890s, which is going to be the new series, is these enormous weird sleeves. I mean, it's just a very, and I just love how bizarre the clothing is. So that's part of it as well. I'm sorry, I'm a terribly shallow individual. What can I say? Yeah, exactly. And the skirts for the Finishing School series, just how you could fit the entire contents of the Spy Museum under some of those skirts. It's so useful and inconvenient as well, you know. But yeah, hence the reason Sophronia is constantly shedding petticoats in the pursuit of her evil ends and gains. Other questions? Yeah.
Who was Lord Akeldama before he turned?
Who's Lord Akeldama? This is one of the spoiler questions. So if you're really, really dying to know, then I will tell you later. But I've dropped a lot of hints, and I will say most of the time, people who've come up to me in a signing line and been like, "Is Lord Akeldama blah blah blah?" They're usually right, because my readers are smart. And also, the Prudence books, I have two, because I do get this question quite a bit. I have two major hints early on in that book that I'm like, come on, you guys, here you go. And part of that is because, and I'm hoping I've done this in a nice, crafty way that you guys are noticing, but a character like Lord Akeldama who shows up in every single book, each main character has a different perspective on him, right? So Alexia, for all that I love her, she's a little obtuse about certain things. Like she's very confident, she's very her own self. But and so Lord Akeldama is her friend, and she loves him, and she thinks he's fabulous, but she doesn't really question that too much further. Whereas Sophronia is very different. Like she meets Lord Akeldama, and she's like, what's he manipulating? What's he up to? What's going on? And so she sees him in that regard. And then Prudence is obviously being raised by him, and so she has a completely different perspective on him. And you know, she has a grown woman's perspective on a parent, right? And so she you know, she challenges him, and she's curious about his history, and she's very observant, for instance, so she notices things about him that Sophronia doesn't care about, and Alexia would never notice anyway. So you get a few more. So each perspective is different, but I have dropped a lot of hints, I swear. I will say that his place of origin is very important, and his appearance. And his preferences. So those are 3 big hints. Other questions? No? Oh, you guys have to have more. Let me see. What else do I need to tell people about? That's my friend Vanessa in the corner. Sure.
What do you see? So you have another book in the finishing school, right? The 4th book.
One more, yes.
Do you think you'll come back to that, or do you think in later series we'll see hints of the finishing school popping up later on?
Well, it is me. So, like, I didn't intend to get this like coiled with my characters. But I do think, there's a hole, and I need a character. Like, what tiny minor character might I have mentioned like 6 books ago who could like chivvy into that hole? Because it's so much fun. And then I get confused with the ages and you know lose. I have this whole like person timeline thing on the wall of my office now, where I'm like, how old is? I need to know when everybody's born. Like, sometimes, is that person dead? Did I kill that character? Yeah. So yes, of course, characters are gonna. And these are spies. Like, I just put a whole handload of spies into my universe, like, naturally. Also, you know, you might want to maybe go back and reread some of the Parasol Protectorate books after the finishing school book, because I might have already dropped some of them in. You never know. I think there's a betting pool going on the internet over familial relationships between several different characters, and whether the timeline allows for it or not. Like, if we got this girl pregnant immediately out of school, could she spawn one of the No. No. But yes, I am going to toy with the minor characters. Absolutely, don't worry about it. And of course, I'm super excited because I put into motion all of these spies, and frankly, 1850s to 1890s, they're getting pretty old, and they're spies, so there's a good chance they're dead because they've been getting up to no good. In glorious ways, of course, they would die. Or maybe completely unknown ways, depending on the requirements of the plot. But I would really love to write some little caption, like novella-length stories or short stories that feature some of the girls from Mademoiselle Geraldine's out in the wild and doing their thing, and, you know, running amok and having romances and all that sort of stuff. So I'm definitely thinking about doing a lot of self-publishing of shorter works that'll go out, and so you'll get to see some of your. And there's I love writing novels. I feel like my comfort zone is novel-length stuff, but there's definitely times in a novel where you're like, that doesn't organically fit that I address these particular side characters in this book. It's just not going to work for me. It's not going to work for my word count. I write very tight. I like to keep my novels a nice, tidy length. So, for example, I was never able to my satisfaction, tie up Lord Alkeldama and Biffy and Lyle. And so one of the ways to do that and to give you guys like a peek at what happens is just to write a short story or a novella. So, but I need to be done to finish this series, and then I've got 2 books to write in the Prudence series, and then I'm going to take a little breather and catch up on life and maybe do some shorts and stuff. So, yeah. So if you have characters that you're like, what happened? What's going on? Drop me a letter. I collect things. I osmose. I'm like, people really want to know. Like, I know Biffy and Lyle. I know. So, I got it. There's a short story already started, which is called Reunion, which should tell you what's going on in that short story. So don't worry. You know, I'll take care of ya. Got to give all my characters their happy endings. I I don't like to leave them untidy. It's very distressing for me too. Yes.
Since we're here at the Spy Museum, what is your favorite spy method to write about?
Oh, this is like, what's your favorite comedy method to write about? This is a hard question. So Nessa wants to know what my favorite spy method to write about is. And it's a terrible thing to admit, but I really like it when there's something deadly going on. Maybe I'm more of an assassin person. But I like the note passing and the note communication stuff. Like, I like it when my characters have to, because I'm dialogue heavy and I adore writing dialogue. So it's a great challenge for me as an author when I have to write characters communicating with each other, not in dialogue, and still make it interesting for people to read. So really enjoy that aspect of it. But I also like, writing about the poison. And I like writing a lot of the girls' side characters like Prescia or Monique, who are, slightly on the deadlier end of the spectrum and a little more evil, to kind of highlight the range of personalities that might choose or be recruited into that sort of lifestyle. So Sophronia clearly has a skill set in one arena. She's very good at at infiltration and social manipulation, but it's obvious that Prescia has a skill set in a completely different arena. But they're both skilled. Other questions? Yes. So the Parasol Protectorate books, the first series, has been optioned. Yeah, but optioned, guys. So what optioning means, for those of you that don't know, it means that Hollywood has, or a film company, production company, has paid for the rights to try to raise the money and get the talent on board so that maybe they might eventually be able to pitch a film or a television show. And they do keep re-upping the option, and they have options specifically for television, which I think would be great. What it also means when you get an option is that they are optioning the rights to the character and the world, not the story. So for those of you who have read Charlene Harris and then seen True Blood, you might notice this fact. So yeah, and they could cast a Renee Zellweger as Alexia. I have no control. There are very few authors who have any kind of control over their property once it's taken away from them. So for the codicils and optioning, there's that. And then for me personally, there are 3 issues with my books, which is their period. So historically, that means a lot of costuming. Their remote location, if you want to set in London, that's like Budapest these days. And their high CGI, because I have vampires and werewolves and steampunk as well, which means that there's a whole outlay for computer tech and stuff like that. So the end result of these 3 is it's incredibly expensive to make something like that. And so there's major strikes against it. I was like, well, couldn't we send the finishing school books to Studio Ghibli? Those Miyazaki films, for those of you, Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro and stuff like that. I was like, that would be great, because my books are really big in Japan. The Japanese love Victorian steampunk comedy of manners, apparently. But it doesn't look like any of the what's the word I'm looking for? The animation houses that I think would really work okay would be really interested in doing them, because I don't think the finishing school books are really a Disney property. And last I heard, they'd option the Gallagher Girls anyway. So Other questions? Anybody? Yeah.
So I have someone who is interested in understanding why you brought the steampunk with the vampires and the werewolves.
Ah, that's a good question. So, and ghosts. Yeah, we don't get to see a lot of the ghosts. I'm bringing ghost character into the Prudence book, so you'll get a like minor perma ghost, at least for a little while, until he goes bonkers. Where were we this? Okay, so it all has to do with the way I was thinking about the world when I was thinking about it originally. And I advise all of you. So how many people here would like to write or would like to be an author or a writer eventually? Okay, so there's a few of you in there. It's okay. Remember how you started, because people are always going to ask you, you know, how did you get the idea for this book, or da-da-da. Just write it down. Just be like, I was in the shower and I thought about space-time continuums or something. So far as I remember, I was thinking about the world, and I was thinking, I love urban fantasy. I really like vampires and werewolves and ghosts, and I was thinking about sort of the first books that addressed them for the Western world, which was in the Victorian era. So the Victorian Gothics are like, they're not the first time, but they set up sort of iconic tropes and things that we associate with vampires and werewolves. It all sort of started during this time period. So I was like, what happened if we took those monsters, and just the ones that were quintessentially Victorian, and stuck them in the Victorian era and made them real? How would Victorians and Victorian scientists in particular react to that? And they're Victorian scientists, so they'd probably want to cut them open, among other things. And they'd want to figure out why they're immortal, and they'd want to understand all of this, and they would invent all of this technology to try to do that. And so the technology of the time period would be shifted slightly because they'd be coping with it. And if you made it so that vampires and werewolves couldn't float, then suddenly air travel becomes more important. So you're pushing air travel in a different direction. And then I was like, well, okay, so obviously, if we have this case in point, King Henry is going to break with the Church of England back in the Tudor time over vampires and werewolves. Because if you have a society that openly accepts them, then you can use them in your intelligence service and in your army, and then you can take over the world. And that's the only way to explain the British Empire, as far as I'm concerned. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever unless you have werewolves fighting in your army. Like, how else would the British Empire exist? So it all kind of made sense. So I just started building the world, and I was like, this makes perfect sense. 'Cause I think it's partly because I'm an archaeologist. So instead of trying to write alternate history, I just try and re-explain the history that already existed. So that was a very long way of saying that basically my vampires and werewolves had steampunk consequences, and it just seemed to work naturally for me. I didn't even really know I was writing steampunk. I didn't really know there was a genre. and then I sort of was poking around, and I started seeing people dressing steampunk, and then I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. Because I'm a total failed goth kid, obviously, because I'm so cheerful, and I'm just like, wee, and I just love people, and I could never be, and it's so much black, and you know, so I just couldn't do the goth thing. But I've always loved the idea of incorporating Victorian like lace and frilly bits and girly bits into everyday clothing, and so like steampunk rolled around, and I was like, hallelujah. Finally, the goths have discovered color. Well, brown. My friend Mike, who's a steampunk scholar, oh, and this makes me so happy. He's a PhD professor in steampunk. He got his, isn't that awesome? But what makes me love it so much is he was there at the very beginning of the second wave. So there's two waves of steampunk. There's the first wave, which is literary from the late 70s and early 80s, and nobody remembers. And there's the second wave, which has the aesthetic movement and the conventions and the costumes and everything. And Mike was like, I'm going to do my PhD on this right as it was being born. So he is an academic who got to study his subject matter as it was happening, which as an archaeologist, I'm incredibly envious of. Where was I going with this? Oh, so he's adorable and fabulous. He's written a paper on me. It makes me seem all official, called "The New Woman." And apparently, I was writing the new woman trope when I was writing my books. I didn't know this. We need academics to tell us these sorts of things as authors. But he also wrote a fabulous article about the steampunk aesthetic in which he says he divides all the different people in steampunk into different categories. And one category is Carriger pigeons. And the Carriger pigeons are the people in steampunk who incorporate a lot of color other than brown, among other things, and they're very into wearing beautiful dresses. And yeah, I was like, oh, I have a posse movement. Yeah.
Do you have a current excavation, or what was the favorite place you went to excavate?
So I am in this enviable position as an author in that I have another career that I also love. Unfortunately, I've had to now not be in that career anymore. But I left my department in very good working order, and they basically were like, my professor is tenured, and they basically just said, anytime you want to come back, that writing thing doesn't work out for you, just come. So. Yes, I do miss it sometimes. It exercises a different part of the brain. I was a scientific archaeologist, so I worked in a laboratory a lot. And there's something very restful about pipetting acids and sticking things in machinery and stuff. It's definitely a different different side of me. But what was my favorite? Because I'm a materials expert rather than an area expert. So I'm a ceramicist. Basically, when you're a ceramicist, you focus on a specific kind of technology. And I'm a transition tech expert between open firings and kiln firings, which a lot of civilizations at different points in time went through that particular transition. And so people would just call me in when they had an excavation that they thought might have this transition technology in place. And so I've gotten to go all over the world and work on stuff from all different parts of the world. So I worked on an Etruscan site. That was my first site in northern Italy. And then the last site that I ended up at was in the highlands of Peru, a site called Chocopuccio, and I think that was probably one of my favorite sites. It's a long occupation site, which means that it had Wari, Inca, and then colonial occupation, and so a kind of time like that, undisturbed, is totally marvelous and fascinating. And some of the pottery is just amazing. But then I also did one of my master's degrees on an industrial production site from Raqqa in Syria, which now the site is no more. But the product was this amazing glazeware on a mass production level, which I'd never studied before, and that also is totally fascinating. So, yeah, I can grumble on about archaeology until the cows come home, because it's so, it's my other passion. So yeah, but I think Chocopuccio is probably really high up there, and I would really love to go back. And it has an incredibly silly name, so of course I love it. Other questions? Oh, okay. You and then you.
How much overlap was there between those two careers? Just now that you mention it, were you doing much writing on the side while you're still an archaeologist, or vice versa?
So how much did the two cross over, he asks. I am definitely one of those. Okay, so I'm a super pragmatic and practical person. So everybody who wants to be an author, don't quit your day job. Don't ever quit your day job, because it takes a long time to be able to support yourself, and you need to have 6 months living expenses, and you need to have a good savings account, and you need to have a plan for your health insurance. So don't be stupid. So I was, 2009 was when Solus came out, and I 2011, I think. So I did 3 more years in archaeology, and I had a very supportive partner, which helped, and I had a medical condition, which forced me to make the choice. I started to develop really bad carpal tunnel because I was writing PhD theses all day and correcting papers, and then writing fiction all night. And essentially, I went to a nerve specialist, and they were like, you got to pick. and I was like, I spent a week on the couch, like sobbing my eyes out, because they were asking me to pick between my career and my passion. to answer the sort of underpinning of that, I've always written, always. As far as I'm concerned, it's like reading or breathing. Like I just always wrote. It's the publishing part that was it was like, oh, it's like, oh, people get, you send it out into the world? How curious. And so I spent this week just like trying to figure out my life. And at the end of that week, I got a telephone call from New York with a book deal. And so I was like, all right, I think I could, figure out a different balance, back off from some of the writing, take a break from writing the PhD. I did just teach for a little while and see if this book thing will work. But I had a very, very supportive partner who was a VP at a tech company in, in Silicon Valley. And so he was like, whatever you want to do, honey. So, yeah. And I always maintained a relationship with my previous career, so I knew that that I could go back to that if I needed to. And I haven't, but I still have we still go to lunch on occasion, find out if everything's still okay at the site. Sorry, I keep boggling my. Was that the right answer? Okay.
You touched upon this previously, but what's your favorite comedy method to write?
So the comedy is a whole different kettle of fish. Oh my God, you guys, it's so hard. I'm gonna take a drink because comedy's the hardest form of writing, I think. And I have a big Post-it note next to my computer screen that says, Gail, don't lose the funny. I have multiple different beta readers that have different senses of humor, and my goal is to get a little LOL in the margin from each different colored pen from each beta reader at different points, and that way I've kind of hit different people's funny bones. Oh my God, that's I really love rule of 3 and callbacks, and you'll see that a lot. I'm a writer who's very vested in rewarding the careful reader, so I feel like if you read my books just casually, then you'll really enjoy them and you'll have a good time. But if you're one of those people who reads super carefully, then I want to give you a present for being so careful. So I will do things like quite a bit of description about a character's attire or something, and then at the very bottom, I'll put in a reverse commentary on it that kind of upends everything I just told you, or twists everything around, or tells you a great deal more about the character, so that you've done all the work of reading that whole paragraph. You get, here's your cookie for having gotten all the way through. I also really, obviously, I love wordplay, so you'll see me do that all the time. I'm still embarrassed about the parasol. I can't help it. I am one of the only human beings on the planet who will laugh at a bad pun. Don't take that as an excuse. But yeah, my partner's a terrible punster, and I will have to I'll occasionally snort with laughter, and they'll be like, no, don't do it. But yeah, so I'll sneak a pun. I'll sneak puns into chapter titles and things like that. So yeah. And I'll squeal. I get super proud of myself if I do something like that, like a really good wordplay. So it's hard to pick just one. And then of course the other thing is just funny characters. So it's always a joy to write an easy, comfortable character who you're gonna put them on stage and they're gonna carry it. So Ivy, for example, or Dimity are both just characters that they're just gonna have a great time and they're gonna make everything cheerful and fun. So another one of my favorite, so lamplighting, which I talked about earlier, there's a line in the Parasol Protector books where somebody actually says that Lord Occaldama always speaks in italics, right? Or there's an Ivy line where it's Ivy walked with she was an exclamation mark, right? And so alluding to the fact that you're reading a written story about these characters is also really fun for me. So I just like to be tricksy. Other questions?
You've mentioned your characters and stuff, and they're all really different and very funny. Where do you actually like drawing your characters from?
So where do I get the ideas for my characters? So Sophronia and her posse are pretty much me and my best friends from high school. I just, what can I say? That's what I had to draw on. Actually, there's a really funny story about that because Dimity is based on one of my best friends now, Fran. And Fran and I met in high school because we loved reading the same authors. In our case, it was specifically Tamora Pierce. And yeah, so we bonded over Tamora Pierce, and now, 25 years later, possibly more, she still is my primary beta reader. So there you go. So you see why female friendships are so important in my books. Now, Fran is basically Dimity. There's not a lot of shadowing over this fact. So she's reading the first finishing school book, and she's going along, she's doing her thing, she's going along, and then like halfway through, which should tell you how much she's like Dimity, I get a little thing in the margin that says, "Hey." And then a short while later it says, "I would not have said that." This is out of character for Dimity. Yeah.
So did you change the line?
Of course. Oh my God. She's never wrong about these things. Of course I changed it. Yeah, Fran, so like I was saying, I have different readers for different things. Fran reads for character, and she's never wrong about character. But occasionally she'll be like, there's something going on in this scene, and it doesn't feel right, and it's usually because characters are being out of character. So, yeah, and then I have another character who you probably all know well, Ivy. And Ivy is another very dear friend of mine, but only when said friend has had about half a bottle of red wine. And so there'd be occasions where I'd be like, I have an Ivy scene coming up, and there'd be a knock, 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 knock on this friend's door and a bottle of red wine. I'd be like, Ivy's coming up, like, get it down, I gotta write a scene. Said friend is also famous for turning to me at one point and being like, do you have any original ideas? Does it all just come from me?
Like, that's great. I'll put that
in my Exactly. Oh, and then there's the ones that sneak in accidentally. So I have this other friend, Paul, and one of my I have a large group of friends. So one of the other ones comes up to me at one point and says, "What is Paul doing in your books?" And I was like, "Paul is not in my books. I didn't put Paul into my books." And they were like, "Yes, you did. He's just red-haired." And I was like, "My God, it's Tunstall is my friend Paul, including the extremely tight pants, which should have tipped me off, frankly." But fortunately for me, I do have the kind of friends that Paul was like, "Oh, I'm in your books? Okay, I'm going to bleach and dye my hair red and wear said pants to your next book launch event." And I was like, yes. So, yeah, because he's Tunstall. He's like, "Do I get to perform? All right, I'll go perform." Anyway, how are we doing for time? Do we have a thing, a timing, a something? Okay, so we can maybe handle a couple more questions. Burning questions. I'll take you next and reverse, yeah. Oh, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Let's see if we can do it. Go.
Are you an outliner?
Yes. Unbelievably meticulous outliner. For Solus, I actually had things I wanted to happen on specific page numbers, and I would write to those events. So, yeah. And I swear, as a reader, I can identify a pantser. Pantsers are people who just write to discover where they're going, and they don't ever write to an outline. And I swear if I read a book that's written by one of those people, I can be like, ooh, they didn't outline. And I'm like, I'm not interested in going on this journey of discovery with you. I would like to feel like I have a firm hand of the goddess on top of me, like I'm reading a woman who's going to tell me what's going on with her characters, because I mostly read female authors. So I was like, I want to know what's going on here. And if I feel like the author doesn't quite understand what's going on, I get very upset, obviously. So not just an outliner, but a militant outliner. I'm trying this new. I'm friendly with Rachel Aaron, or Rachel Bach, who wrote the Paradox series, and she just wrote a book called 2K to 10K, which is about how to increase your word count. And she has this layering methods for outlining. So you go in, you put the outline in, then you fill in some more, and then you fill in some more, and then you fill in some more. So I'm trying that for for Imprudence, and it's going pretty well. So obviously it's. Yeah, I'm an archaeologist. You know, like we're like the organization gurus of the universe. It's always a joke in archaeology, we're always the smallest department in anthropology. Like there's like 150 cultural anthropologists off doing their thing, watching people basket weaving, and then there's the archaeologists, and then the arch-phizzers who are like concentrating on their bones, and the archaeologists are always in charge of the department. They're always the head of the department because we're logistics. Like we organize people to go in groups out into foreign countries, you know, and then we drink. It's the best cross. That was the ultimate. Like archaeology gave me the training to be an author. Because yeah, I mean, we like to pretend that archaeologists like to pretend that we drink in the field because it keeps us from getting sick. There's no scientific basis for this whatsoever, but we like to pretend. I don't know what the excuse is for authors. I'm giving a terrible impression. I'm really not that much of a. Actually, I'm the worst lightweight on the planet, but I've learned to drink in very small amounts over long periods of time. Yes, who had the second one? Yeah.
I love your Retro Rack blog.
Oh, thank you.
Do your research, and if you do your own.
I do.
Your time management skills.
Thank you. Thank you.
With your
Well, this is the downside of working for yourself. Is like I just never have to stop working, and you'll see me like I'll be like online on Twitter at 2:00 in the morning. Yes, I do my own research. Occasionally I don't. Like occasionally I have an assistant and I'll just be like, she mostly handles like my itinerary and travel and stuff like that. But occasionally I'll just be like, I need to know the exact schematic of a steam train from 1852 and I don't have it. I like, go, get me a picture, print it, like, so occasionally, but most of the time, I call it rabbit holing. Because it's so much fun to because I'm an archaeologist, so I'm like, oh, did they have syringes in, 1852? I have no idea, and I would love to know this fact. And like suddenly I'm reading about, early surgery in the Crimean War, and it's been 6 hours, and I haven't written anything. So one of my techniques is called TKing, which is the letters T and K don't exist together in the English language unless you're writing high fantasy, of course, where you, yeah. Someone got the joke. So you can just put T and K into the text anywhere in your manuscript if you're typing, and then do a find later. So if I feel like I'm writing really well and I've got my flow on and I'm doing my thing, and there's a research point, I just TK it and write a note to myself that says, research syringes, and then keep writing. Because frankly, at the end of the day, I have a deadline. It's very important to me to try and meet my deadlines because I am an outliner, which means I'm a control freak. And so I know research derails me. It derails me so easily. So the TK method. And then, of course, I'm cursing myself. The future me is really mad at the old me because I only gave myself a week to deal with all these things. And I don't really have a week, but it's probably healthy for me to restrict my research. But it's so much fun. Clothing in particular, obviously. So we had one final question. Yes?
Speaking of Hands of the Goddess, which is your favorite Tamara Pierce book?
What's my favorite Tamara Pierce book? So that's a really difficult question because she is for many of you, it's Harry Potter. But for me, it's Tamara Pierce. Because her first book came out when I was 8, and Alana was 10, and I was an advanced reader, so that was like the perfect book for me. And she's the only author I remember, going to the bookstore the day, and you had to ask the librarians when the release date was for books because they're the only people who would tell the layman. And so I'd have to go back to the bookstore over and over and over again to get the new book. And my parents let me buy it in hardback, which is a really big deal because we didn't have very much money, but it was the thing that Tamora Pierce is also the only author I met and actually was like total fangirl. Like I can't speak to this. So Alana obviously has a lot of meaning to me, and it's still one of my favorite. Like I pretty much will pick up any book where a girl cross-dresses in order to infiltrate patriarchal society. It's like my favorite thing. And that's all her faults. But I really love Kel a lot too. And I, as I've gotten older, I've gotten more and more into her. That's the Protector of the Small series, because she's, yeah, I like that she's kind of I like that Tamora intentionally kind of tried to write a character who was more of a general, more of a leader character. Alana is very much a hero's journey. Like she's very like a solo quester style character, and Kel is more of a networker. And obviously, if you read my books, you know how much that's important to me. And so I, but it's still like if my world is falling apart, it's still Alana. And I just read them all in order. I mean, Tamora wrote it as one major book and then broke it down, so I feel like those 4 books are one book. But if you force me to pick, I think it's probably Woman Who Rides Like a Man. Because I think it's a beautifully tight story, that middle one. And she and George finally get together, and you've been waiting like forever. So yeah, but that's a great place. So yes, yeah. When you're finished my next book, go read Tamora Pierce, because oh my God, you guys, if you haven't, I'll go reread her, because why not? It's like a perfect cup of tea. It's reassuring every time. And on that note, let's. I would love to meet you all in person. Let's sign some books. Okay.